Good afternoon. My name is Marla McGinnis, and I will be your moderator for today's media availability. Today's participants include Jason Mew from the Nova Scotia Emergency Management Office, Matt Drover from Nova Scotia Power, Major Christopher Michaud, Officer Commanding Task Force Cape Breton, Christina Lamy from the Cape Breton Regional Municipality, Erica Fleck from Halifax Regional Fire and Emergency, Dan Bedell from the Canadian Red Cross, Jeff Moore from Bell, and Steve Irvine with Eastlink. Before we begin, I'd like to share that today will be our last scheduled Hurricane Fiona briefing with our partners. We will, of course, not hesitate to come together again if there's new emerging information to share. But for now, I'd like to express my sincere thank you to each of our partners for joining us here each day to share updates. I will now turn it over to Mr. Mew.
Thank you, Marla. Hello, everyone. We're now 6 days out from Hurricane Fiona. The focus here in the Provincial Coordination Center hasn't changed. We're focused on clearing trees and debris and repairing damage caused by the storm so Nova Scotia Power crews can restore service to people who don't have their power back on. We know it's been a long haul for folks, especially in Cape Breton and northern Nova Scotia. And I think I can speak for the team here at the Provincial Coordination Center when I say thank you for your patience. We're working together with our partners to get everyone back online. If you're one of those areas without power, obviously in Cape Breton and northern Nova Scotia, you're probably already seeing our crews on the ground with additional crews to come. The Department of Natural Resources, Renewables, Wildland Fire Team has more than 100 people on the ground, and they're bringing in additional wildland fire teams from Quebec, New Brunswick, with more en route in the next couple of days. That's double the number of crews out clearing the way today so that Nova Scotians can get their power back on as quickly as possible. That's also in addition to the 1,400 crew members Nova Scotia Power has on the ground, as well as Team Rubicon, Halifax HUSAR, which is heavy urban search and rescue, ground search and rescue, police, firefighters, the Canadian Armed Forces, and the Canadian Coast Guard, and many others. I want to assure Nova Scotians that this is our top priority. And again, I know it's been hard for folks who are still without power and for people facing significant repairs to their homes and property and their business as well. This is very challenging times. As Marla said, this is our last planned media briefing, but we are by no means wrapping up at the Provincial Coordination Center. We're going to be open until this is finished. And we'll be here and active 24/7 till all our critical infrastructure like power, telecoms, and roads are fully restored. We'll keep you updated as long as along the way and through our social media and online publications. And again, thanks for being patient with the team. We're going as quickly as we can, keeping the public safety and the safety of our crews in mind. And I just want to give a thanks overall to all of the partners that are working tirelessly in the Provincial Coordination Center, within the municipalities and throughout the province to get us back on our feet as quickly as possible. Thank you very much, and over to you, Marla.
Thank you very much, Jason. We'll now take questions from reporters. We're going to use the one question, one follow-up format. Please remember, reporters, to identify who your question is for. We'll start today with Jesse Thomas with CTV. Go ahead, Jesse.
Thanks. This question is directed to Mr. Drover with Nova Scotia Power. I guess I'm just looking for an update. I know at the height of the storm, we had 415,000 customers without power, significantly more than the 300,000 in 2003 with Juan, and obviously more than just a little more than Dorian. But I'm wondering if you can compare the efforts. What has maybe made this one more difficult? Why are we seeing it take longer to get the restoration process completed, perhaps?
So a few things with this storm. This was a historic storm for Nova Scotia. A lot of people have been saying that it was the size of Dorian with the strength of Juan, so pretty much those two storms combined. And that has really left devastation throughout the entire province, specifically in the northern part of the province. Truro, Antigonish, New Glasgow, and all of Cape Breton have really been hit the hardest. Everywhere was hit, and those areas were hit the hardest. Extensive damage where we've had thousands of trees come to the ground, and hundreds of poles and wires have come to the ground as well. I've said before, but on some streets, we've had every single pole along that street come to the ground, just to give you an example of some of the devastation that we've seen. And really that's what's making this restoration so challenging. But because of that, we also have a historic restoration plan on the ground. Over 1,500 people now responding in the field, and hundreds more behind the scenes.
Jesse, do you have a follow-up question?
Thank you. This one could go back to Mr. Drover and perhaps our Canadian Armed Forces representative that's on the call here as well. We heard today Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston appealing to the federal government to get more military efforts here. What will that do for the efforts to speed things up? And are we any closer to getting confirmation that we will have more support on the ground? Because as I understand it, there might only be more than 300 armed forces here.
Maybe I'll turn that one over.
So at this time, like within the 3 provinces, we have more than 600 Canadian Armed Forces members. Just in the Cape Breton Regional Municipality alone, we have another 200 or so Canadian Armed Forces members. With regards to the request for an increase, it's not something which I personally, it's been passed down to me that it is coming. So I cannot speak to whether it's been approved or what have you. Yeah, that's pretty much all I can tell you at that one.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll go to Stuart Peddle with the Chronicle Herald. Go ahead, Stuart.
Well, my question, I guess, would be to Mr. Bedell with Canadian Red Cross. I think a lot of our questions focused on responsibility for repairs, but I don't know that we've ever focused on the people who have been displaced. So I was wondering if you could give me the totals of those people who have had to be out of their homes, the Canadian Red Cross's efforts to help them, and what their outlook is for as timeline as possibly getting back into their homes.
Sure. I mean, obviously, we don't have the full picture on this either, other than those that we've assisted in shelter operations. So as you know, the biggest of those have been in Halifax, although that one, the demand is declining somewhat. There's still a sizable operation in Cape Breton. We're adding one actually in Pictou County in conjunction with the province and other authorities there. You know, so those are the places where the Red Cross is on the ground assisting people who are actually out of their homes now. The key thing for us, like the next phase of our operation, really is financial support. As you've seen on earlier briefings, the Nova Scotia government has announced a number of measures, including a one-time payment of $1,000 per household to impacted families. We're administering that on their behalf. The key thing that people need to do to qualify and benefit from that program is to register with us. That's the first step. So they can do that online at redcross.ca/Hurricane Fiona, or they can call a toll-free number. We have our operators there 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. That number is 1-800-863-6528. Now, we fully recognize that a lot of the people who are the hardest hit may not have power yet, or internet, or Wi-Fi, or phone service. So, you know, that they may not even be aware that these programs exist yet. And even if they do, they may not have a means to call in or go online to register. We're fully cognizant of that. We will assist them in the same way as soon as they are able to register. But for that program, for that $1,000 payment for the eligible households, only one person per household has to do that registration process. Our commitment to the Nova Scotia government was that we hope to start rolling out that money by Monday. That's still our intent. So our expectation is that, you know, some of the people who've already registered and meet the criteria will have money in their bank account starting Monday.
Thank you very much. Stuart, do you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, perhaps this could go to Erica Fleck, if she can in fact help me on this. HRM has a lot of trees that are already in infrastructure in the area between sidewalks and streets. I don't know, I can't speak for other communities, whether the other municipalities have the same thing. Was that, logically, you would think that has caused an issue if they were underneath power lines. Is that something that would be reassessed in the future as far as emergency and given that storms are likely to become more severe?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Stuart. So our forestry department under Public Works, we work very closely with Nova Scotia Power throughout the year, and we do have tree trimming programs in HRM that we look at reducing, of course, you know, any chance of lines falling on those, et cetera. And I know Nova Scotia Power has the same program, and we do work together all throughout the year to make sure that we reduce that risk for residents. But we always continue to review everything after every crisis event.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Jeff Bird with All Nova Scotia. Go ahead, Jeff.
Hi, my question is for Matt Drover, just on that same subject of sort of hardening infrastructure. You talked about yesterday that the best sort of preparation that we can do is some of these tree trimmings, but I wonder if I could get you to talk a bit about burying lines. I know we've heard from Nova Scotia before that the cost, which obviously is borne by ratepayers, about 10 times as much, but I wonder if maybe the calculation has changed now, where we see, the impact of these storms and the cost of power going out, of people throwing out their food, not being able to work for days on end.
So there's a few things on that. We do have some underground systems in Halifax and Sydney, and some of the other municipalities have underground as well. And while underground systems can be more reliable when we have windstorms or tropical storms like this, when a problem does occur, it does take longer to find the problem, and the outages can be longer when you do have an underground system. So while underground can be more reliable, it also creates longer outages when they do occur. And they are more costly. As you mentioned, underground lines are almost 10 times as much as overhead lines. And we have over 500,000 overhead poles throughout the province. So it would be a huge undertaking to bury all those lines. But we are looking at all times to work with municipalities and developers to find opportunities where that does make sense.
Thank you. Do you have a follow-up question, Jeff?
Yeah, I guess I would try and sort of rephrase that for the two gentlemen from Eastlink and Bell. Just wondering what difference it would make, or what would it take to have your sort of services put sort of buried?
Sure. Thanks for the question. So I'll very much similar answer to what Matt talked about. We do have areas within HRM and across the province where we have underground infrastructure. Certainly from trees falling, wind events like that, certainly is a greater resiliency. And as Matt has said, when you do have a trouble in the underground, the restoration times are actually, usually significantly more lengthy than they would be with aerial plant. Then of course you want, overlay the cost side of it. It's certainly more expensive to put the plant in the underground and, and kind of build that out across the province.
And for Eastlink, very similar response. So yeah, much more costly and much longer repair times. And even in some of the windstorms that we've seen, when the entire tree topples down and the roots come up, that can damage underground plant as well.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll go to Michael Tutton with Canadian Press. Go ahead, Michael.
Just following up on that with Mr. Drover, and so in the areas that were underground during this storm, did they lose power?
There were some underground systems where the beginning of those lines are overhead and then they go to underground later on. That did lose power. But in a storm like this, when we have windstorms, underground systems do typically perform better. I think it's also important to note that because there is so much overhead throughout the province, it is very disruptive to bury those lines and to dig up all that area to put those lines underground. So I would stress again that while we don't have a lot of underground today, we do look for opportunities to do that where it is not as disruptive and it makes sense.
Michael, do you have a follow-up question?
This is, no, I actually have two, but anyway. Well, I guess, can I get one more? But I'll just try here. When do we expect full restoration?
So we're working around the clock on that. Obviously, we have a all hands on deck approach to restoration. We're expecting that the majority of customers will be on by the end of the day on Friday, tomorrow. And there will be some pockets where we have had that extensive damage that it will go into the weekend and early next week.
And if I could just slide one more here for gas availability. When I was in Cape Breton, there were shortages, and apparently gas powered generation was not available for the central place where gas and oil was pumped. And many gas stations don't have generators in an era of climate change and frequent storms. I guess for Mr. Mew and maybe Christina, what is going on? Why do we not have generators or gas depots resulting in public lineups and public distress for days? What is going on there?
So I guess I can start off on that question. So for gas stations, obviously the province doesn't own any gas stations, and they're all owned by private companies. So it would really, I believe, come to I guess some leadership on the federal side of things if they want to regulate that. But that would be something that the federal government would have to look at.
Okay, next we'll go to Callum Smith with Global. Go ahead, Callum.
Thank you. My question is for Mr. Drover, and you just mentioned most people should be reconnected. Most people should be reconnected by tomorrow night. But aside from as soon as possible, I'm wondering when you think all Nova Scotians will be reconnected, and what do you say to those who would rather an honest ETA versus constantly having them being pumped back?
So I definitely understand how important restoration times are to people, and we do our best to estimate that based on the information that we have. As we get more people out in the field, we're adding more resources every day. We are uncovering areas that are more extensively damaged, and it's those areas where we've had many trees come to the ground and knock over infrastructure, where we're having to rebuild the entire line. That is going to take a bit longer to restore. We definitely understand that, and as soon as we have a really good estimate, we'll be updating our outage maps so that people can understand what their estimated restoration time is.
Do you have a follow-up question, Callum?
I do. Thank you again for Mr. Drover. You talk about this being a historic storm, and I mean, you've mentioned the challenges. Is Nova Scotia Power satisfied with its own response to Fiona? Why or why not?
I think what's important to note about the storm is that it was historic, and our restoration for the storm has been historic as well. We've brought in more resources for this storm than any that we've had for any storm that we've had before. Over 1,500 people in the field right now, and more coming every day. And we've been working really closely with our partners in Canadian Armed Forces and Department of Natural Resources to restore power as quickly and safely as possible. And that'll be our focus until everybody is back on.
But sorry, are you satisfied with the response?
I think that it's still unfolding, and we're still focused on that right now, and our focus is to get everybody back on.
Thank you.
Thanks. Next, we'll go to Ian Nathanson with the Cape Breton Post. Go ahead, Ian.
Hi, message for Jeff Moore and for Steve Irvine, and not to continue to spar words between yourselves and the Premier with the sort of the response. But given the historic nature and given that everybody seemed to be caught off guard, is there any way in the future, if in one of these events, that say access to a 911 at the very least could be connected to any of the internet or wireless services?
So maybe Steve, I'll start with that. From a wireless perspective, 911 is certainly available. And if long as you as a wireless user have access to a cellular tower, be it your provider or any others, you are able to dial 911. So I'll start with that. Wireline services, 911 is part of that as well. So from my perspective, be it wireless or wired voice, as we know it today, is still the best way to access 911 here in Nova Scotia as well as the rest of the country.
Yeah, and similar response from me, certainly on the mobile networks. 911 is the highest priority call, and as Jeff mentioned, even if your own service provider was down for any reason, the protocols within the cellular system will find a signal if it's available.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Ian, do you have a follow-up question?
I do for Christopher Michaud and or Christina Lamy. Early in the week, we were saying that we on Cape Breton, there were about 126 troops with the possibility of asking for more. I know the mayor of CBRM was basically pleading, and the premier, again, to follow up on the premier was asking for more military troops. Where are we standing now with the restoration efforts? And as well, will we need to, I'm going to sound like a broken record here, extend the state of local emergency for the CBRM?
I can speak to that a bit, Ian. I know the mayor and council are looking at all the considerations that they have in place in regards to extending the local state of emergency, which would assist them if they need to take the lead on certain facilities that aren't necessarily the municipality's own facilities. But anyway, this is moving kind of quickly every day. We are making logistics things come together right now for hundreds more power line workers to be arriving. So the forces on the ground right now are strong and getting stronger, and because we're working through I guess you would say the priority and larger scale connectivity, but the smaller scale and down to little clusters of homes in various areas is going to take quite some time. But the more people that are on the ground working towards it, the faster that will be.
Great, thank you.
Okay, next we'll go to Adrian Blanc with Radio Canada. Go ahead, Adrian.
And thank you. My question is for Jeff Moore and Steve Irvin. Talking to people today, many seem to assume that there is a mandate for a minimum cell service during the storm, but it doesn't seem to be the case. Would your companies be open to having a mandatory minimum service standard during the storm?
So from the Bell perspective, and I think, I'll leverage some of what Matt talked about with this being a historic storm. I just don't think it's reasonable, recognizing a weather event like this to have, a mandatory mandate to be able to provide service. I think it's just physically not possible given events like this. So, from a Bell perspective, we strive to have our network on or service available 100% of the time. We don't like being either off the air or off the net. It's just not how we operate. I just don't think from a regulatory perspective, and I think as well, just given magnitude of the storms and the events we've seen in the past number of years, that's something that would be reasonable.
Yeah, and obviously with the size of the storm, we absolutely do our best. Lee spoke a little bit about this yesterday, that we are extremely motivated to try to get everything back up and functioning as quickly as possible. Lee threw out the figure for the Eastlink services. We were about 99% of our customers connected to mobile services yesterday. We're virtually 100% right now. Absolutely, there's still some concerning pockets that we're focused on. But I think we're certainly very proud of the teams and what they've done to maintain a lot of critical services across the provinces. Is there more we can do? Absolutely. We always learn from these types of events and these types of storms, and we will absolutely be doing postmortems and lessons learned, and we'll continue to improve.
Adrian, do you have a follow-up question?
I do. As you know, there was a meeting between the Federal Minister for Industry yesterday and the main operators. And after the meeting, one of the attendants, the MP for Halifax, and Moore, said that the federal government could have avenues for additional funding to prevent cuts during a storm. So as cellular operators, what should be the priority for these fundings?
That's a good question. To be quite honest, I'm here to talk about our technical updates and our restoration efforts, and obviously power has been something we've talked a lot about in the media as well as at these sessions this week. I think obviously that would be a starting point where we would want to focus if there was funding available, investments to be made.
Yeah, I think it's important in these types of events that the government and they have to be part of the solution here. Certainly, there's always opportunity to do more, but as we spoke about in length yesterday, there's only so much we can do when you've got a massive storm of this magnitude coming through, ripping down trees, ripping down infrastructure. We talk a lot about power, but typically these cell sites, they are connected with fiber optic lines as well. And when those fiber optic lines are down, the service is not working. So again, there's more we can do. There will be some lessons learned from this. We'll continue to improve. And I think it is beyond the the telecommunication companies to sort this out, but we really need to be working closely with government assistance to make sure we're finding the right solution for Canadians.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Creason H. Kute with CTV. Go ahead, Creason.
Hey there. I guess this is for Jason Mew. Can you give us an update on the food fuel supplies needed in Nova Scotia? Are there any shortages? We're also hearing food bank needs are soaring right now. How many people are using the food banks, and how much food is needed?
So the fuel sector is recovering. The Imperial and Irving suppliers have been had their power restored for a few days. So the lines are getting shorter, and at night sometimes there's no lines at various gas stations. So the fuel sector is certainly recovering, and within the next few days, hopefully we'll be back to normal. There are several gas stations that don't have power, but they are a priority, and we're obviously in discussions with Nova Scotia Power to make sure that they can be prioritized in the restorations, especially if there's only one or two gas stations in that community. So that definitely something we're tracking within the Provincial Coordination Center. In regard to food, there's a lot of NGOs that are supplying food, as well as at the Red Cross shelters and the feed banks. Yes, they are providing food for those that are in need, but the Canadian Red Cross is there, especially within the shelters and comfort centers. And if anyone, any municipality requires more support, they can reach out to the Provincial Coordination Center 24/7, and we can certainly link up some supports in regards to anybody that has any needs.
Creason, do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, thank you. And what is being done to prioritize to help low-income seniors and residents who are still without power? Their food has gone bad, and they're having to make a lot of sacrifices to keep going at this time.
Is that a question for me?
I guess whoever could answer it, is there anyone available there that can answer that question there?
Yeah. So the Premier did announce several programs to assist those that do require some additional help through these times. But again, if anyone does need assistance, we please reach out at any time. We do have wellness checks going on throughout the province. We've engaged ground search and rescue teams that are actively doing wellness checks throughout the province. So we're taking a lot of those types of support requests through 211. So anyone can call 211, leave their name and number and the type of support they require, and we'll get back to them. And if they require a wellness check or something else, we'll have ground search and rescue reach out to them.
Thank you very much. That concludes today's media availability. Again, thank you to our participants and to all for tuning in. Have a great day.
Yep.